Okay, my friends, I am going to pick up where we left off. I just saved the selection, and so if it gets deselected like that, or if I were to close down Photoshop and come back to the image later, I could open it up and go Select, Load Selection. It's called Pieces. I'm going to hit OK. So now I have my three pieces of a photo that are selected, and now I want to move them. Okay, so I want to put them back together. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing, so you might have to watch this a couple times here, but you'll get it. Okay, so we have three pieces, and we want them to move them, to put them back together. So, the way that I do it is I pick one piece to be the anchor piece, the piece that's not going to move, okay? And then I move the two pieces, or however many, in relationship to that one. So I'm going to say this top left one, just because it's the closest to being straight, is going to be my anchor piece. So I'm not going to move this piece. So I'm actually going to deselect it. Now when I deselect it, grab my lasso tool. When I deselect it, I'm going to hit Option and just go around it and just deselect it. So as long as I don't resave the selection, it's still part of the selection. If I went and hit Select, Load Selection, it would bring it back. But I'm not going to move that piece, so I just wanted to deselect it right now. Now, we have to move these two pieces separately, so we can only do one at a time. So I'm going to move this right piece, the grandma, first. So I'm just going to hold down Option because I've decided I'm going to move this piece, one piece at a time. So I'm going to deselect this piece right here with the guy and the little kid in it. So I'm just going to zoom around it with the lasso tool and Option being held down. Now I just have this piece selected, just the grandma. That's all I have selected. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste this selection, which is going to make a secondary layer of just this piece. Okay, so I'm going to, with just this one piece selected, I'm going to go Edit. Oh, sorry. What is it under? Oh, yeah, Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. Boom. And we see right here, now I have this thing called Layer 1 on top of the background layer. And don't worry, those of you that haven't had Photoshop yet, we're going to get into layers this whole semester. We're going to be talking all about them. So, by copying and pasting that selection, I now have a layer of just that piece. And so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab the Move tool, which is the top tool in the stack. The keyboard shortcut is V. And now if I click and drag, I now can move that piece, or a copy of that piece, right? Because I copied it. I can move it independently of the other pieces of the photo. I can also use the keyboard, the arrows on the keyboard, to do like really fine adjustments. And if I need to swing it around, right, to square it up a little bit because the gap down here in the rip is bigger than up here, I could go Edit, Free Transform, and then I could float outside of the Free Transform, and I could click and rotate that piece like that. And once I have it where I want it, I could hit Return. That looks pretty good with the rotation. I'm going to just use the keyboard keys. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So I'm just using the keyboard arrows to line this up. And I'm really paying attention to this woman's shoulder. And yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So now I'm going to zoom out. Okay, so now I have the piece with the older woman connected to the anchor piece. Now I need to move this piece. So this is where a lot of people get messed up, so pay attention here. So, to then select this piece, we have to go over to the layer stack, and we have to re-click on the background. You can't do it from this one, right? So whatever layer is highlighted is the layer that's selected. And once again, if you didn't have 142 Photoshop, don't worry. We're going to cover this later on in 143. So, I'm going to go back to the background, and I'm going to go Select, Load Selection, Pieces. I'm going to hit OK. And now we have our original three pieces reloaded. Remember, though, the original one over here is under the copied one. So now I'm going to go and grab my lasso tool, and I'm going to deselect the ones I don't want to move. I don't want to move this one because I already moved it, or I moved the copy of it. I'm going to just go around it with the Option button down. I don't want to move the anchor piece, so I'm going to hold Option, and I am going to just zoom around it to deselect it, being kind of careful in here a little bit, and boom. Now I just have this bottom left-hand piece selected. So now I'm just going to go Edit Copy, Edit Paste. So Edit Copy, Edit Paste, and it will paste that piece in as a secondary layer right there. So now I could grab my Move tool and bring this piece up where it needs to be. If I need to rotate it, I could go Edit, Free Transform, and float my cursor outside of the box so that the cursor turns into this 90-degree icon, and just slowly rotate it. Well, that's looking pretty good right there. I'm going to back it off a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to pull it down just a little bit, like there. And I'm going to hit Return so that it does the free transform. And I'm going to zoom in, and I am going to use the keyboard arrows just to get this thing lined up exactly where I want it. That's looking pretty good to me. We see that the tear and the selection is not perfect, right? Look at her hand, the baby's arm. There's some missing bits in here, and that's pretty standard. That's where like the emulsion broke off of when it was off the photo when it was ripped. That's okay. We don't need it to be perfect. We just need it to be close. And I'm really paying attention to the boy's face because that's where it's going to look real weird, right? If we get this wrong, it's going to look real weird, right? Or her hand doesn't match up. So I'm just paying attention to her hand, the little kid's face. I'm trying to get it as close as possible. Maybe even his hair a little bit. Okay. So boom, there it is. Right? So now what we did, we took our 3 pieces. We decided one to be the anchor piece, and then we deselected everything except for the 2 that we were going to move, and then moved those independently. And now we have a background layer, a layer of this piece, and a layer of this piece. This is how you can turn those layers on and off. So now what I want to do is I just want to flatten the image because I want to make these changes. I want to take these copies and put them over the top of the old one. So I'm just going to go Layer, Flatten Image, and now we see we're just back to a background, and our image is just this now. So what I'm going to do now is I want to straighten this image out. So I am going to make sure that my rulers are on. These are the rulers right here. I talk about them in the Photoshop interface tour. If your rulers are not on, you can go View, Rulers. And the reason I like these is because you can click inside, hold the cursor down, and drag a horizontal and or a vertical marker into your image so that if you have to rotate things, you can line it up perfectly. Okay, so now I want to kind of straighten this image out because we see that it's low on the left side, high on the right side. So I'm going to go Edit. Oh, why can't I free transform? Actually, you know what? Let's crop. So I grab the crop tool, make sure that the ratio is just set to ratio, and I'm going to kind of bring it over here a little bit. Because I want to get rid of the green. We obviously don't want the green to be part of the photo. Okay, okay. And you're never going to get the borders to be perfect at this step. We're going to fake it later, but at this step, you're not going to get the borders to line up perfect. Like you see over here, we have some weirdness in the borders. That's because this photo is like, when it was scanned, it has like this like crimp in it, right? So it's not actually sitting super flat. But so this looks pretty good to me. I'm actually going to rotate it a little bit by floating outside of the crop menu and just, oh, wrong direction. Maybe something like, that looks pretty good to me. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to maybe pull this in a little bit. And it's okay if you crop out some of the border, because we're going to kind of fake it. Okay, that looks good. Once I have my crop and my rotation down, I'm going to hit Return. And boom, now this is my photo. This is looking a little bit more like the original that we started out with. I'm going to grab these guides and drag them back into the rulers. That looks pretty good to me. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fake these borders. And I'm going to show you how to do that by using the selection tools. So to do it, we're going to just do what is called a fill layer over the top of these. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to grab the rectangle marquee tool, I'm going to select it, and I'm just going to click and I'm going to drag over the border. And then I want to add to it, so I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select this border. If there's any weird stuff, like where the crack is in this photo, like up top where it doesn't line up, I'm just going to go over it a little bit, like that. I'm going to add to this side. This is looking pretty good. I'm going to add to this side. If I did something like I maybe went a little bit heavy on this bottom so I could get rid of, right, so I crop out some of the photo. That's not the worst thing in the world because these photos are pretty small. But I could also fix that by going like that. Notice that these photos are not, so these were all printed optically in a darkroom from a negative, and you're going to be surprised to see that they are actually not perfect rectangles, because the enlargers or the easels that were used when printing them were probably not exact rectangles. If you haven't taken a darkroom class, you're probably like, what is this guy talking about? Okay, so now that I have the border selected, I'm going to go Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color, hit OK, and I am just going to click a color in the image, a highlight in the image, right? So I want a really bright color. I mean, you could pick anything, right? You could have a dark border. Now that would look pretty weird. So I'm just going to select a highlight, like something like that, and I'm going to hit OK. And now, right, if I turn this layer off, that's where we were, that's where we are now. So we just fixed the border, right? And you can actually take the opacity of this layer and bump it down so we can kind of see a little bit of like the coffee stained stuff under here, if you really wanted to see that. I don't really want to. I'm just going to bump the opacity down to like 92, something like that. That looks good to me. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but you could have it be a solid border like it was a brand new photo. So I think that looks pretty good to me. So that is how we move the pieces and fix the border. In the next video, we are going to be talking about the giant cracks through the middle of this photo and how we're going to fix that. So see you there.